Welcome to Genealogy 401, Finding Your Military Roots. I'm your host, Nicole Ware, Senior Associate State Director of Advocacy and Community Engagement for AARP Ohio. I lead the advocacy work and community engagement work in Southwest Ohio, specifically Cincinnati and the Dayton-Miami Valley area. I know that many of you are joining us from across the country, and it's always fun to see where you're joining us from. So if you would, in chat, tell us what city and state you're from. Oh, wow, Florida. Great. I know we have more than just the villages in Florida. There we go. Nashville, Tennessee, Shreveport, Louisiana, New Jersey, Mississippi, California, Dayton. Wow, Cincinnati, Westchester, Akron. This is wonderful. Keep it coming, keep it going, because I know you all like to see where people are hailing from as well. Okay, so before we begin, I'd like to walk you through how to engage with us during our time together. Move your mouse or your cursor across the bottom of your screen and you will see the Q&A icon. So you already know how to work the chat because you're commenting in chat, but later in the program, we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions. You can ask our speaker questions directly, and we want you to put those questions in the Q&A icon. Now, why do we want it there instead of in the chat? Well, because you see all these lovely comments scrolling by, it's hard to kind of go back and find your question when it's there. But when it's in the Q&A icon, we can easily isolate it. So remember, questions, Q&A, comments, chat. All right. So AARP has been working to promote the health and well-being of older Americans for 66 years. And we recognize that many of you are joining us today, maybe many family members of those who were in the military and made the ultimate sacrifice. Perhaps you're a veteran or friends of a loved one in the armed forces, and you'd like to share this information with others. We hope that you do. Today, a professional forensic genealogist will explain the process of returning servicemen and women who have died in combat or are unaccounted for by using genealogy and DNA to identify the next of kin. At the end of today's presentation, you will be able to ask questions and learn how to engage in this process of locating and returning your loved ones home. You'll also receive a handout and a survey at the end of this presentation in your email. In the coming days, you'll be able to view it on AARP Ohio's YouTube page, and we'll put that link in chat for you. Feel free to share the recording of this presentation. Did you know that AARP.org/veterans, you can find resources and information around VA benefits, health, caregiving, fraud, and employment for retired and active duty military and their families. Download free handbooks such as 6 Tips to Know About VA End-of-Life Benefits, How to Obtain VA Healthcare Benefits, Financial Assistance and Programs to Modify Your Home, resources to help veterans and their families navigate career transitions, and learn about the latest scams targeting military families. You can find all this and more at aarp.org/veterans. That's aarp.org/veterans. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dana Palmer. Dana is a certified genealogist who specializes in lineage society applications, publishing family books, and Midwestern research, specifically Ohio. In addition to her client work, she is part of the Mayflower Silver Books team and lectures at Roots Tech and the National Genealogical Society conferences. Dana is going to tell you about military repatriation and how it can help bring your loved ones home. You'll have an opportunity to ask her questions at the end of her presentation. Just remember to put your questions in the Q&A icon. Welcome, Dana.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All All right. Okay, so again, I'm Dana Palmer. Welcome. This lecture I call No Soldier Left Behind, Military Repatriation. And today we're going to talk a lot about the process, what is military repatriation, and how it can benefit you. On our overview today, we're going to talk a lot about what the process is, we identify next of kin, DNA testing, how we identify the candidates, contacting the next of kin, and finding living relatives. Just to give you a little bit of background, I was hired with a private investigation company back in 2000 to do military repatriation work. We had contracts from the government through the Army. And so a lot of the examples I'm going to talk about are the ones that are specific for the Army cases, but they have uh, organizations like what I'm going to show you for all the different branches. And I did military repatriation work for a little bit over 4 years. So what is military repatriation? Repatriation, it's the process of bringing home a body of a service person who's died. This is available for most of the countries out there. The ones I'm going to show you today are specific for the United States of how they're bringing back their soldiers, because truly they don't want to have anyone left behind. All branches of the military United States have a unit that deals with making sure no soldier is left behind. Though, as I said, the one I'm going to cover is called the Past Conflict Repatriation Branch. This is the branch, we call it the PCRB. It's dealing with the Army. They have similar organizations for the other branches of military out there. And the one that the PCRB is under the Casualty and Mortuary Affairs Operation Division. A lot of these use acronyms, but this is the one it's under, and their headquarters is in Fort Knox, Kentucky. There is an article I subscribe to, and they have news every month or so, and sometimes it's about genealogy topics. But periodically, they'll have announcements about soldiers and servicemen whose remains they've died in action or they're missing in action, and they've recovered their remains, and the DNA has been able to positively identify them and their success stories. This is the most recent of the articles that was published. You can see it was published back in March 2024, because that's the most recent one that they've released. And this one came out in April. This is one of the soldiers that was identified that they talked about, and they have lots of these. When I was reviewing cases, um, just in the 4 years that I worked, I did almost 250 cases that I reviewed, and that's just the short time. And I'm just one person that's working on it, and they've got lots and lots of different researchers out there reviewing these cases, and they've got hundreds of thousands of soldiers they're still trying to identify. But this soldier here, Frank Bennick, he was from Michigan. He was killed during World War II, and they were finally able to identify him in February of this year. And this article goes through and talks a little bit about his service and how they were able to recover his body. And you can see here in the past, generally, in order to identify a soldier, they would use dental records or other identifying features on the soldier to be able to identify him. Once DNA started to be come into play, that really opened up the field because they were able to identify people that they could not identify before. And so that really made it a much better success of finding these soldiers and bringing them home. And you can see here his name was recorded in the missing of action, and he was buried in April of this year down in Florida. So this is really exciting that we've able to bring another soldier home. Again, I'm going to talk a lot about the Army because that's the cases that I dealt with. The PCRB is again, the organization that I dealt with, and their mission was to collect, assess, integrate, and distribute to the next of kin. We call these the NOCs, the next of kin. They also gave this information to concerned citizens and other government agencies. And these are dealing with those that are unaccounted for, service people that were killed in action or missing in action. The four wars that we mostly focused on were World War I, World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam. I mostly dealt with cases in World War II, but they have lots of different organizations and contractors out there that are dealing with these different conflicts and making sure their veterans are brought home. There aren't as many from World War One, but they are working on making sure everyone's identified if they can. Here's another one, just to show you that same article I talked about before. I subscribe to it, it's free. And like I said, I like to know when they've identified the veterans. This is a soldier who was in the Korean War, and they were able to finally identify him in September of 2023. He was a first class. Smith was from Oklahoma, and he was declared killed in action in 1950. So you can see it's been many, many years since he was killed in action before they finally were able to recover his body. Because of the fighting that went on in Korea, his body was he was left behind, and they didn't have proof whether he died there or whether he was a prisoner of war. But they finally were able to identify him. And this article was quite interesting. It talked about how they were able to find proof of him there. And a lot of the soldiers, if they have remains, there's a big warehouse that's in Hawaii where they have the bones and the remains of the soldiers that are unidentified. And then they DNA test those and then they compare them with what's in the database. Once they're identified, then they make contact with the family and they're able to bury the remains. So again, this is pretty exciting, especially with the DNA and the advances that are made. The PCRB and the affiliate organizations for the different branches, they do make contact with the family, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the process in a few minutes. But when they contact you, they're either going to call you. You'll get a letter. Generally, it's on a letterhead with a logo from them or from the contractor. Sometimes they'll send email correspondence. And if you're lucky enough to have your ancestors' remains that are identified, sometimes they'll have in-person meetings. They call these family member updates, where they actually will meet with you and make arrangements to get your soldiers' remains brought back and buried. The PCRB is also responsible. They implement legislation. They deal with repatriation plans for prisoners of war. They keep case files. These are extensive. I know, and I'll talk about these a little bit later, for their unaccounted for soldiers. As researchers, we'll get these case files, and they're very, very detailed. And so, if you want to find more about what happens to these soldiers, you can get copies of some of these files. They also conduct prisoners of war and missing in action awareness programs out there. They have PCRB has a proactive outreach program. Their primary goal is to identify that next of kin. The PNOC is the primary next of kin. That's their first order is to identify that primary next of kin because they're the ones that are going to make the decisions on what happens to the soldier's remains. The SNOC is the secondary next of kin. They identify both of those. So if something happens to the primary next of kin before they make contact, they have a secondary person they can go to. Uh, we also identify people for DNA testing, specifically the soldier's kin, because they are building a very massive database, and this database allows us to positively identify these soldiers. So even if they haven't found the remains, the DNA testing is still very valuable because it can help eliminate your person from the one that they've found the remains for. We're going to talk a little bit about the military repatriation process, the different steps that are taken. So the first step is the soldier or the Army Air Corps airman, or whatever branch you're in, is going to be identified by the Armed Forces Medical Examiner. So whatever branch you're in, they're going to identify them, either their remains or their tags or something. They're going to be identified. Once they're identified, the PCRB or the affiliate program for the different branches is going to assign the case file for that identified service person. These are given to designated contractors. Now, sometimes we'll be given cases even if they haven't necessarily identified the person, because as I said, they have a very large warehouse full of people with remains that they don't know who they are. And so they have lots of different cases out there and they're trying to build their DNA database. But a case file will be assigned to the contractor. The contractor is then going to assign it to a researcher. Step three, that contractor is going to give a case to either a certified genealogist or accredited genealogist. The CGs and AGs are the two boards in the United States that are certified to as genealogists. They're the ones we know what that know what they're doing. Either the cases have to be reviewed by a CG or an AG, or we have researchers that will do research, and then as CGs or AGs, we review their work to make sure that they've identified the correct primary next of kins, secondary next of kins, and the correct DNA candidates. And different contractors do it differently. The organization that I worked for, the company I worked for, we used a lot of the research to do what I call the grunt work, to do all the research, make contact with the family. And then once they were done and wrote the report, then I reviewed it or the other CG reviewed it, and then we would go through it and make sure that everything was correct. Once it's passed off, then we would, as I said, we would give it back to the PCRB. Our main goal was to identify that next of kin and identify those DNA people, because that's what the PCRB would use to be able to contact the family. As I said, we had very detailed reports about the family. We had to have proof of birth, marriage, death, everything that would be needed to prove that we've got the right people. Step four, the PCRB or the affiliate organization for the other branches of military out there would then contact the next of kin that we list in the report, and they would schedule a report of investigation. That includes they would send permission for DNA testing. A lot of times, as researchers, when we were looking for DNA candidates, we would have choices on some of them, and we would try to find people that would agree to test because it would speed up the process significantly. And that way, when they contacted them, these are people that would already agree to test, and it would make the process a lot faster. Um, and then, like I said, they will have a report of investigation that would have details of that research that's done. The next of kin, they were allowed to review the case files that we put together, which was, I thought, very helpful. Step five, if applicable, so if a soldier's remains were identified, then arrangements are made for the soldier's funeral and interment details, and any related expenses for bringing him home. They would make all the arrangements. The next of kin, the primary next of kin, the PNOC, that is the person that makes those decisions. And so it's very important that we identify the correct person, because they're going to make the decisions on what happens to the soldier, what cemetery they're being buried at, and any other details related to that soldier. All right, so how did we identify the next of kin? Well, as I said, we do a lot of research to identify the next of kin and extended family members. We had to have supporting research in our report. It had to hold up to legal scrutiny and industry standards. If the Knox, sometimes they would get called into question to court, and if that's the case, we had to make sure that we've identified the correct people, because those are the ones that make the decision on the soldiers. And generally, we didn't have problems with people contesting who was the next of kin. Everyone knew who it was, because we talked to the family. But occasionally that would happen, especially when we'd have very difficult cases with adoptions or half siblings or other relations. Sometimes it was very complicated. I had one that I reviewed where biologically one of the Knox, the next of kin, was a grandchild biologically, but the grandparents adopted that grandchild, and so legally they were the child, but DNA wise, they were a grandchild, and that made a big difference on what DNA they could be chosen for, as well as their Knox standing. So it's really important sometimes to understand that. And I'm not going to go into all the detail of that. I do have some details on how we choose the next of kin in the handout. As I said, sometimes state statutes on the heirs or inheritance had to be consulted, because the different states have different rules, and we had to go by whatever state the soldier resided in at the time of death. That's the statutes we had to review. And there were times when we had to review those, but most of the time it wasn't a problem. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about DNA testing to explain how we choose who can be tested. So, about 1995, DNA was becoming very popular and started to be tested. And at that time, the government decided that mitochondrial or mtDNA was the best way to identify service persons' remains. Before that time, as I said, they used the dental, the teeth, or they would use other identifying features, or if they found their tags, to identify the soldiers. But DNA really, really opened up a lot more way that we could identify these soldiers. There are two main ways that are tested. You have mitochondrial testing, mtDNA. Both ways, both of the all the DNA methods use an oral sample. From mitochondrial is the female line. The Y-DNA is more recent, and that is testing the male's maternal, the father's line. And I'll talk about how we choose those people in a few minutes. When we reviewed cases, we had to not only identify the next of kin, but we had to identify people that could be tested for DNA. Each case, they wanted us to find three mitochondrial candidates, one Y-DNA candidate, and either some kind of autosomal or nuclear candidate if possible. Now, I'll tell you, there were cases where we couldn't identify any, just because of where they were living, whether they were overseas. We had some that were in the Philippines, and we couldn't identify any living people over there because we couldn't make the contact with them. And so sometimes that was very difficult. But in the majority of the cases, we were able to identify candidates. Sometimes you'll have family members that are eligible to donate on multiple types of DNA tests, and I'll show you an example of one of those. So, how did we choose our candidates to be tested? You really got to understand inheritance. I'm not going to go too much in detail. I'll give you some of the basics, and then if you have questions, you can ask me more at the end. And again, if you have questions, put it in the Q&A, and we'll get to those later. When you're looking at mitochondrial candidates, both male and females inherit mitochondrial or mtDNA from their mother. But only females, biological females, are the only ones that pass it to their children. That's really, really important to understand because when we're looking for mitochondrial candidates, we have to look for qualified maternal lines to be able to test. And then we will ask the people if they're willing to test. And then we want to find ones that are willing because, again, it speeds up the process. So this is a chart I created because of the cases in dealing with living people. I've signed non-disclosure agreements, so I can't actually show you names of people that have been tested. So I created this little chart with numbers to explain how inheritance works so that you can see what's done without violating the non-disclosure agreement. Anyone that is a square or the blue shade are males. Circle in pink are females. And so number one and two up here, these are the parents. So if you go down 3, 4, 5, and 6 are the children. 7 through 14 are the grandchildren. 15 through 30 are the great grandchildren. So if we're looking for mitochondrial candidates, again, everyone inherits mitochondrial. So 3, 4, 5, and 6 all inherit mitochondrial. Everybody gets their mitochondrial from the X chromosome. It's inherited through the mother, but only females pass it on. So you can see number 3 and number 5, none of their children will qualify because they're males. But if you look at number 4 and 6, both of number four's children, 9 and 10, both will work for mitochondrial testing because they inherit from their mother. And on number 6, 13 and 14 also are qualified. But if you look at number 9, again, number nine's daughters won't work because he's a male. Only females pass it on. But number ten's children will work, as do 13 and 14's children. So you can see there's a lot more mitochondrial candidates that can be tested. You got a very, very broad base, which makes it very, very helpful to find candidates. And I'll tell you, there were times in order to find a mitochondrial candidate, there's a thing called daughtering out, which basically means there's no female lines close. And we would have to go back several generations to second or third great grandmothers and then to the sisters of the line we're working on and track them down. Sometimes it was difficult to find qualified candidates, but we work to identify those family members to be able to do that. Now, if you're looking at Y DNA again comes from biological father to biological son. For your Y-DNA candidates, we're looking for biological male relatives. They have to be biological blood related to be tested because they have to be related to the soldier biologically, blood-wise. So again, if we look at the same chart, we're looking for the Y candidates, the male candidates. And again, the father, if he's living, would work, and then the two sons, 3 and 5. 3 only has daughters, so these daughters won't work. So 15, 16 won't work because they are a child of a daughter, number 7. But if we go to number 5 has a son, number 11. So both 5 can be tested, 11 can be tested, and 11 has a son, number 23. So number 23 can also be tested. Now, let me show you 2 live examples, real life examples of how we did this in one of the repatriation cases. Again, I've blocked off all the names because these are living people and I'm not allowed to share that, but you can get an idea of what we do. So when we're reviewing cases, we have to go and identify siblings of the soldier, nieces and nephews, grandnieces and nephews, the parents, the aunts and uncles, grandparents, and so forth, cousins and so forth, because we have to figure out who the next of kin are, the Knox, as well as the DNA candidates. We have to know birth dates and if people are deceased, because that helps us choose the qualifiable candidates. So you can see here in the middle, when we do charts, it's helpful if we label them as childless or not, because then when the Army or the affiliate other branch of government reviews the cases, they can see right off the bat if someone's childless, then they're not going to have children, and that makes it easier when they're reviewing the cases. So the first thing we do is identify who's living. Anyone that's got an X here, I've marked off because they're deceased. So what we do is then we look at who's living. And as I said, they've got a very, very strict order that they use for identifying the next of kin. It's very, very specific. And it's how closely those next of kin relate to the soldier. Generally, and it's very particular. It's in your handout. I'm not going to go over it in detail. But you can see here the sister is the closest living relative to the soldier. So she would be the next of kin. So she is the oldest living relative. So she would be the knock, the P knock, the primary next of kin. The next generation, since there's no more siblings, would then go to the nieces and nephews. And you can see there's nieces and nephews here, as well as these ones, and then the sister from here. It's in order by seniority. So the oldest living is the next person. So the S knock would be the nephew that's born in 1946. Now, if the PNOC or the SNOC died before they were able to be tested, then they would go to the next person. So you can see this niece here that's born in 1955. She would be the next person. If she died, then it would be the niece that's either here in 1961, this one, or this one. And again, it's their birth date. Who's the oldest? And it completely by full birth date. So whoever's the oldest, if this niece was the oldest, she would be the next person. Now, it doesn't matter if these people want to be the next of kin or not, they're still the next of kin. And so they may not agree to DNA tests, but they're still considered the next of kin because that's the standard operating procedure that the government gives us that we have to identify. Now, if we're looking at DNA, because the sister is female, she gets mitochondrial from the mother. So she is a mitochondrial candidate that could be tested to compare against the soldiers when the soldiers mitochondrial tested. Down here, you can see this sister had 2 children. Both of them qualify for mitochondrial testing, but in this case, this is the niece is the one that agreed to do it. Now you can see here this sister who's deceased had 4 children. The oldest one here is the SNOC, and again, he's a mitochondrial candidate because he comes from a sister, from a female line. Um, and you can see here, this sister who's deceased, that she had a lot of kids that are all dead, and she has a niece here. So any of these nieces and nephews that are living can be tested for mitochondrial because they inherited from the female line. Over here, you can see since the soldier didn't have any brothers, we have to go back. Since the father's deceased, we have to go to the grandfather and then look for the father's brother, so an uncle to the soldier. You can see the uncle's deceased, as are the first cousins. And so the next thing is this cousin here. You can see this cousin has two daughters and a son. This is a qualifiable Y-DNA candidate. And so if I want Y-DNA candidates, I have to go to this first cousin once removed to be tested for Y-DNA. If this person won't work, then I'd have to go find somebody else. And like I said, sometimes we had to go back pretty far to find people. So here's another example. This is from another case I did. This one's a little trickier because it's got halves and steps. So you can see here's the soldier. He's got two brothers and a sister, three half brothers, and four stepbrothers. Now, these stepbrothers, since they are biologically not blood related to the soldier, they cannot Y test because they are not Y DNA candidates or mitochondrial candidates. They cannot Y test because they're not blood related. Again, we go through and identify who's living and who's deceased, and you can see I've identified a lot of those. The brother is the oldest living, so he's the PNOC. The half brother is the SNOC. Now, when we do the order, full always comes before half. And so the brother is the PNOC, the half brother is the SNOC. If this half brother died, then it would go to this one. If that one died, then it would go to the nieces and nephews. And again, it would be in order of seniority for the same degree of kinship. Now, looking at DNA, you can see this PNOC here. He works for a Y DNA candidate as well as mitochondrial, because again, everybody inherits mitochondrial. So the brother inherited his mother's DNA, which is the same as the soldier. So he inherited his mother's DNA. So he can be tested for both. But the SNOC cannot be mitochondrial tested because he has a different mother. And so this one won't work for mitochondrial. Now, to get the other mitochondrials, you can see there's a sister of the soldier who's deceased, and she's got, so the soldier's got lots of nieces and nephews. Again, anyone that's living here can be mitochondrial tested because they come from the sister. These are the two that agreed to test. This niece that's deceased has a child that's a daughter, and she also agreed to be tested. So you can see I've got a lot more ability to choose for mitochondrial here. Now, contacting the next of kin. Generally when this is done, researchers will reach out to the family members first, and we'll send them a letter saying that, we are trying to contact the next of kin for this soldier, and we're trying to get information about them for the case file to build the database. Just keep in mind, just because they open the soldier's case file does not mean they've found the remains. They are trying to build a massive database and test as many family members as they can. So when they do find and recover remains, they're able to identify them. The goal is to get as much DNA samples from all the servicemen of accounted service people as they possibly can. Now, the letter that's sent is going to give you contact information for the different organizations. In our case, it was for the PCRB, and the researcher assigned the case. Now, again, because some of this is proprietary for the organization I worked for, I have put a generic version of the letter that we sometimes send out. So we'll have the date on there, we'll have the DNA candidate's name, and the contact person. We'll list the soldier's name and rank. And then basically it tells our goal. We're trying to find the next of kin and DNA samples. We have the contractor's name, whatever the name of the company. Again, I've blocked that out for privacy. And it just gives you details of what we would send to the family member. And here's more of the letter. Again, they're not trying to sell you stuff. They do have a phone number that you can call. They've got YouTube videos. You can Google this. and find out more information. Each of the branches has their own division. And so if yours is in a different division from the Army, then you need to contact your specific branch and to do this. So this is an example of the letter that we would send out to the family members. Generally, we'll send it out certified because honestly, a lot of the people think it's a scam and they'll just throw it in the trash. And I'll tell you, when I got hired back in 2020, right before COVID broke out, um, I'd been a CG, I'd been a certified genealogist for 10 years, and I had not heard of what military repatriation was because I mostly tracked people's ancestors, not necessarily finding the soldiers' relatives. And I didn't know what it was. And so I said, well, thank you for the information. I took their contact information and then I went and searched for it. And it is legit. And so then I contacted them back and they hired me. And so that's one of the biggest things that we deal with as researchers is the family doesn't always believe us, but we've had such good success with making contact with family, and it's very, very emotional. It's really wonderful when we're able to reconnect them with their missing loved ones. Um, as I said, the genealogy researcher, their goal is to identify those relatives. They're going to call, they're going to email, they're going to conduct online research. They've got to verify the names of the extended family members. It has to hold up to legal scrutiny. We've got to find birth dates for marriage, for birth, marriage, and death dates if people are deceased. That helps us identify those next of kin and the potential candidates that can be chosen. Once we've done that, then we give it back to the organization like the PCRB, and then they make contact with the family. The PCRB, once they get the report, they then contact the next of kin, and they confirm their address. They request consent to send them a kit, and then the kit is sent to them. Once the kit arrives, it's going to come in a package. It's a prepaid FedEx envelope. You spit in the tube, you fill it out, you put it back in the package, and you mail it to the base in Delaware. The lab in Delaware then goes through the DNA and they add it to their database. The DNA from this is very, very unique. They do not use it for anything else. So if you have DNA tested elsewhere, like at Ancestry or Family Tree DNA or 23andMe or MyHeritage or one of the other DNA companies out there, you can't use that DNA. It's not going to be in their database. So I really recommend if you have a serviceman that has died or is missing in action, or you have extended family members that's happened to, go test. You can contact them and get tested because the more they build this database, the more success they're going to have of identifying the soldiers' remains that they have in that warehouse in Hawaii. Now, how do we contact living, find these people? There's a lot of places that we use. I like using Ancestry, Family Search, MyHeritage. Sometimes we'll look for trees, for people that have posted trees and then make contact with them. But there's a lot of different ways to do that. Sometimes we'll go use the public record indexes that are there. There's just a variety of things that's used. I got an email recently from a family member who dealt with this, and I'm gonna read just for a minute and share what she shared with me because I thought it was really, really neat. And I'm not going to give you her name because I want to protect her privacy, but she said, I wanted to share a moving experience in which I participated that seems in line with your topic. Because of a tree I had on Ancestry.com, I was contacted by an organization that connected World War II South Pacific Island battle remains to living relatives. While I was not biologically related, she was the half sister married my mother's brother, is what she said. I was able to reach out to that side of the family whose DNA test then confirmed a match at the Pearl Harbor repository. His remains, meaning the soldiers, were brought back to California with military honors and his surviving half sister in attendance. It was on the local news. It was so significant. The family was so grateful to finally be able to put him to rest personally. The point I make to all of you is that you never know what good can come of making your tree public. So I recommend if you have a family tree, make it public. If you don't, get a family tree on there because it really makes aids us as researchers trying to contact family members and get your DNA tested if you can. There are also some websites that we use to find people. Ben Verified and Informion are two that we use. Informion's one that our private investigation company used. I think we had to be a PI to do that, and it's a subscription-based site, and they would run reports for us to help us find those living relatives. But there's lots of different ways that we would find living relatives because sometimes it can be challenging. Sometimes we would go to county auditors' websites. We would use tax records, licenses. Sometimes we'd make contact through the genealogical societies. We'd use newspapers. I love looking for obituaries for deceased family members because it'll tell often who the living family members are and where they're living. And then from there, we'd go to the public record indexes and we'd be able to find the family members. Sometimes we'd use the white pages or other tools out there. Social media was another really, really good resource for us to find living people. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. There's lots and lots of things out there that you can use that we would use to find living people because it can be challenging. And sometimes when we'd find one family member, we would talk to them and they would give us contact for others. But again, if you can test, it's going to save and speed up the process significantly. This is an article back from 2020 in April, a few months after I got hired. And I wanted to include this article because this newspaper interviewed, they had a prisoner of war that was in the Bataan, which is in the Philippines. This is a lot of the cases that we reviewed were in the Bataan area. It was just a horrific area. Lots and lots of people died on that march and they found his remains and they brought him home and they wrote it up in the newspaper. It was so significant. But this was one of the researchers that worked with me. He's the one that actually found his family and asked them to test, got the permission and gave it to the PCRB. And you can see he was one of the um, 75,000 American and Filipino prisoners who were marched 66 miles to the prisoner of war camps after the fall of Bataan. And thousands of people were died along the way, and many of them were just buried in um, these massive graves that dig up the ground and throw the bodies in there. It was just really, really horrific communal camps, and it was diseases and um, starvation and other things. But they were able to identify him and bring him back. And this is just one success story that was out there. There is a website. This is the Defense Prisoner of War and Missing in Action website. This is a government website link down here at the bottom. If you want to take a picture of this page, you're welcome to, or you can come back if you watch the lecture again. And you can visit it, and they'll have different servicemen mentioned here periodically. It changes from time to time. This is the one that was up when I screen captured this. You can see he's from North Vietnam. And it gives some details. He was finally identified in 2023. And you can see from Vietnam, it gives details about his service, and that he was missing in action and killed it. He was missing in action there. And it has a link down here. If you've got a service member, it gives you details about how to contact your local office about that. And so this can be very helpful. If you scroll down, they have a map here that shows where this is the area he was serving in, and he was lost somewhere in this area. And you can see this Ronald Forrester who served with them. He's still unaccounted for. And so Ralph Chipman, Captain Chipman, they found, but his partner they have not found yet. But I thought this is a really great website that you can go to if you've got questions. So I'm going to do a quick summary and then we'll take some questions. Again, military repatriation work is really, really important part of making sure that no soldier is left behind. There's many techniques that are used to identify our next of kin and to get their contact information. Again, we like to use the trees, the public record information, the social media. We a lot of times will call family members, and we use that to help identify who the oldest living relatives are, so that the Army can make contact or the affiliate organization. Modern DNA really has made leaps and bounds, bridging that gap between the old method that they would identify the remains with the newer techniques that DNA testing allows. It's really, really made it much better. So I really implore you, if you have an opportunity, contact your local organization, and get your DNA tested, because you never know how it can help the soldiers. If you've got soldiers who've served in World War One, World War Two, Korean War, or Vietnam, really consider contributing, so that it can build that database. I'm going to take some time for questions. You're welcome to, if you do have a question, you can always contact me later. And I wish you the best and hope you have success finding your family and honoring your loved ones and their service. Um, so thank you. I'm going to go ahead
Awesome.
and
Thank you so much,
thank you.
Dana. All right, so now it is time for our Q&A portion. Please remember to put your questions into the Q&A icon. We do have strong participation, so I know people are listening to you. So I'll start it off with a couple of questions here. So once the organization has identified the next of living and they've taken the DNA sample, how do they dispose of the DNA sample after they've identified that person, since they don't
Um,
use it for any other purpose?
right. That's a good question. What do they do with the DNA once they're tested? I don't know. I don't know what their policy is for that, but I know they don't. I know once it's in, they build the database. I don't know if they keep it. I don't think they retain it. I would ask when, if you call them, I would ask them. I'm not certain what their policy is on that, but I don't think they keep it. It's not like some of the other companies out there that do keep the DNA on file. I mean, I know that they keep it, but I don't know if they keep the sample.
Mhm. Do you know, and just along those lines, you may or may not know this. Do you know who all has access to the DNA results that is being collected within that agency?
The government, just whoever's in the government and the reviewers, as
Okay.
far as I know. The people that identify, I think it's the medical reviewer. It could be more people than that, but it's very, very limited. And I know that it can't be, from what I understand, it's not used for anything else. It's just
Mhm.
to identify the soldiers and compare it with the remains that they have on Hawaii. And I don't know if they have different databases for all of them. I think they have just one master database, but I'm not certain.
Okay. And have you ever had a case when the you had an unexpected DNA result? Like, could it ever be wrong? And if so, what happens in those situations?
Can you ever have I mean, you can always have. I mean, the only time I would think it would be wrong is if you've got someone who has, if they're not really biologically related to the soldier. But as researchers, we work really, really hard to, one, make sure we've identified the correct people, and two, to make sure that they are biologically connected. But can there be a mistake? Yeah. I mean, if you've got people that have lied about who their parents are or grandparents, yeah, that could mess things up. But most of the time we work hard, and then that's one of the reasons why they test so many people. So if you do have one mitochondrial that's candidate that's not correct, you should have correct results with the others.
Okay, that's a good point. Thank you. So a couple of questions have come in. The first one, these are just, I think, general questions about genealogy, so perhaps you can
Okay.
refer them to another resource. But Brenda is wondering how to locate records about an American mortician and how they were assigned to a British Union unit in Northern India. Where could she go?
A British mortician
Hmm.
for which
An
which
American mortician got assigned to a British unit in Northern India as a nurse in World War II.
World War II.
She,
Okay. I would, were they missing in action, or are they just they survived it?
it doesn't
Because if
say.
they survived, if it's World War II, in St. Louis, they have the National Archives. World War II and after, they have copies of their files in St. Louis. You can go online, Google National Archives, and you want the one that's St. Louis. If it's World War I and before, it's the ones in Washington, D.C., and they would have the files. Now, if you're dealing with people that are missing in action, they have additional files depending on the branch that you're in. But if they're World War II, I would start with Washington, the one that's in St. Louis, the National Archives. and you have to request it. I don't remember what the fee is for it. Last I can't recall the fee, but you do have to pay for a copy. They do have some record loss for World War One, and a little bit, but for the most part, there's pretty good records that you can get.
Okay. And Carol says she knows this was about repatriation. She has an uncle that died in the Battle of the Bulge. He's buried in Henry Chapel American Cemetery in Belgium. She has his date of birth, but that's all. DNA. Can you tell me how I can find out the town where he died in and what battles he was in?
I would get a copy of his military file because it should have everything. And again, if it's World War II, it's in St. Louis. If they died over there and they haven't brought the remains back, then whichever branch of military he's in, like I said, mine's the that I dealt with was the Army, so the PCRB, contact them because they have a very, very extensive file, much, much more extensive than what's in St. Louis. And I would contact both places. So you want to contact St. Louis for the general military records. If they're missing in action or killed in action or they died over there, then I would get a copy of the file from the affiliate, whatever organization they're in, whatever
Okay.
branch of military.
Thank you. All right, we do have some more questions coming in so that we don't have to go back and forth between looking in the chat and the Q&A. If you could put your questions in Q&A, that would be very helpful to us. But the next question is from Elaine. She says, my dad was captured at Hill 303 in Korea. He was rescued, but I'm trying to get information about the memorial at the top of the hill. President Obama was there for the dedication. Where do I go to get a picture of the memorial? I believe my dad's name is on it.
Is the one that's in Washington, D.C.?
Um, she doesn't say. She
Okay.
said he was rescued, but she's trying to get information about the memorial at the top of the hill. So, and it's Hill 303 in Korea.
Oh, in Korea. Oh, um, well, that's a good question. Um, I would contact the local organization. I mean, you could probably use the ARP or one of the other organizations and see. I mean, if it were me, I would make contact with a serviceman that lives over there and see if they would go and take a picture. That's what I would do. Um, um, I'm not certain how else to do that unless you contacted on Find a Grave or some other organization like that to see if they could take a picture. But again, if they've got records, I would think that their file, if they're overseas, whichever branch of military that they're in, they should have files. Are they going to have pictures of the memorial? I don't know. That's a good question. Um, if Obama was there, I would Google it. It might be online because they probably have news articles on it. But if you want an actual picture from today, I would find a serviceman that lives there and have them take a picture. That would be the best way to get it.
It's a good suggestion to, if Obama was there, he probably can track that down online. You also mentioned a website. I think you said Find a Grave. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, findagrave.com. It's a free website for finding tombstones. And you can go and see if he has a memorial there. If not, you can create one and then request a photo. It's totally free. I use it all the time. I don't know if it's a memorial for this, if it would be there or not, but you can check. Never hurts to try.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, and Nancy says, if you have no idea if there were relatives missing or killed in World War One or Two, is your DNA eligible for testing to grow the database?
Um, Well, if you don't have any relatives that died or are missing in action that you know about, then I don't think they'll have you test unless they contact you. But again, sometimes we went really, really far back out and down to be able to find people, and so they didn't have any other close relatives that served. But sometimes it's helpful. You can always call them and ask them and see if they're interested. It's worth, but a lot of times they want it from the family members first because they're trying to build the database first. But I would ask, it never hurts to ask.
Okay.
They'll probably say no, but it never hurts to ask.
All right, so just a couple more questions, unless we have more questions. I have two more for you. So there were some people who were joining us while well into the program. So I just want to repeat a couple things for them. So who is responsible for military repatriation, excuse me, and how does that play into the Defense POW/MIA Accounting Agency, the
So,
DPA?
right. So the military repatriation, each branch of government has their own division for military repatriation. I dealt with the Army, so it's the PCRB, the Past Conflicts Military Branch or Repatriation Branch. The different branches have their own. I don't know the names of the other ones because I didn't deal with them as much. You can Google it and you can find websites that talk about the different branches. And their main goal is to make sure no soldiers left behind. So they're to identify the soldiers and if they can, bring the remains home. They want to make sure no one's left behind. So that's their main goal. But the DNA testing and identifying family is one part of that because they're trying to build that database so that when they find the remains, they can make sure that they've identified the correct people.
Okay, and then also our AARP volunteers and staff have been putting into chat links to other branches of the military that has military repatriation services. So you can scroll up into the chat, but I would ask our volunteers to put those in chat again for you if you would like to look at that. And then let's see here now. So if you'd like to end the handout, so this is being recorded. So two ways. This is being recorded. It will be on AARP Ohio's YouTube page. You'll get the link there in the chat in just a second. And then also in a couple of minutes, you're actually going to get an email from AARP asking you to take a survey so we can understand how we can serve you better. And then you'll also see a link which is a handout from Dana that she has provided where you can get more information about the services there and follow up. Okay, so that was for Mary Ann. Let me make sure I answered her question. I have a general ancestry question. Okay, yes. In fact, for general ancestry questions, I'm gonna put two links in the chat for you. And then also direct you to AARP Ohio's YouTube page, where we have done Genealogy 101, which is a general session, Genealogy 201, which is helping people find their African American roots, Genealogy 301, which is about forensic genealogy, and then later in the coming days will be today's session, Genealogy 401 for military repatriation. So lots of resources for you, and then also put in the chat some nonprofit organizations to help you get connected to other professional genealogists. Let's see. Okay, so one more reminder, you've already talked about this organization, the CMADO. Are they able to support families going through this process? And if so, how?
Yes, so that is the yeah, they're part of the PCRB is part of that. And again, their whole intent is to support families and bring their loved ones home. So yes, they're very, very helpful.
Okay,
And you can contact them and they will help you with the process.
awesome. And so before we sign off, we're gonna put those links for you in that one more time for the various branches of the Army. And unless there are any other questions, we really want to thank you, Dana, for being here. Don't sign off just yet. We have some more information to share with you. But any closing remarks, Dana?
Just, thank you for your service for everyone that served. It makes the world a better place for us. And if you have that opportunity to do your DNA testing for this, I definitely recommend you do that because it really helps tremendously to
Thank you for that
identify those
reminder.
soldiers.
Yeah, and thank you for being on with us because you're not feeling the best, but you did a great job, an awesome job. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So
Thank
we're
you.
gonna let Dana go for now. And however, we have some more information for you. Okay, so I'd like to highlight a couple of ways to engage with AARP. Did you know that a new way for members to experience AARP is by volunteering with us? As an AARP volunteer, and you've seen a couple of them assist us in the chat, You'll be able to support family caregivers, help make your home and community more livable for everyone as you age, help prevent fraud, engage voters, and support legislation and policies that benefit the 50 plus community. You can also enjoy fun sporting, cultural, and community events, or even volunteer from home, like our volunteers today. Many AARP volunteers are around the country, find volunteering to be a fulfilling experience. You make new friends, you keep your skills sharp, and it's just a great way to stay involved and build community. So if you're interested in becoming an AARP volunteer in your area, you can visit aarp.org/I want to volunteer. That's aarp.org/I want the number 2 volunteer, and an AARP representative in your area will contact you. And that link will be in the chat for you as well. We hope to see you at another AARP Ohio virtual event. The next one coming up is How to Avoid Medicare Fraud on September 17th from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern to help you prepare for Medicare enrollment. AARP is collaborating with Pro Seniors. There we go. With Pro Seniors, a legal nonprofit organization that serves older adults, as well as the Ohio Department of Insurance, Ohio's Senior Health Insurance Information Program. The acronym, you may know them by OSHIP, OSHIIP. They are a division of the Ohio Department of Insurance. And again, they'll be with us along with Pro Seniors to talk about the latest scams and how to prevent that and report Medicare frauds, all meant to help you get prepared for Medicare enrollment. You'll be able to understand and recognize some of the errors and abuse and know who to call about your Medicare options. And of course, you'll be able to ask questions during that session as well. So we hope you register to attend that in a couple of weeks. You can register the event by clicking the link in chat, or you can go to AARP's Virtual Community Center at aarp.org/VCC. That's aarp.org/VCC, AARP's Virtual Community Center. Or you can go to our webpage at aarp.org/Ohio. So any of those links will get you to that event. And finally, AARP is local, offering meaningful connections and enriching experiences close to home. So to find AARP events near you, visit aarp.org/local. That's aarp.org/local. It's been a pleasure being with you today. Again, in a few minutes, you'll get an email from us with a survey and a link to the handout. Thank you for joining us. We hope to see you at another AARP event. Good night.